The gala was a spectacle of glittering lights, grand speeches, and the hum of diplomatic backdoor deals. The grand hall of Ryler's towering city structure, the exalted spire, gleamed with opulence. Flags of dozens of species adorned the walls, and the air hummed with the artificial warmth of the planet's carefully controlled atmosphere. Music flowed like a river, soft and calming, weaving its way through the conversations of ambassadors and dignitaries. Yet beneath the veneer of civility there was an edge, a palpable tension that only the humans seemed to recognize. Captain Elias Dre stood at the center of the room, his posture composed but his eyes ever watchful. He wasn't just here as a representative of Earth, he was a warning. His gaze flicked over the other species as they mingled in tight circles, eyes darting to the Krazar House contingent, their insectoid forms towering and rigid, their mandibles twitching in barely contained aggression. The Ekori delegation hovered nearby, their translucent, energy-based bodies shimmering like liquid light, ever aloof, but their eyes, if you could call them eyes, seemed to watch everything and everyone. Among the ambassadors, the human contingent was a small but noticeable presence. Standing apart from the others, they wore dark, military-style uniforms, designed more for function than form. The humans never quite fit in at these gatherings. Too blunt, too direct, too human. Captain Dre, king of voice, smooth and almost predatory. Elias turned to face Yukon, the Krazar High Ambassador. The Krazar were known for their militaristic nature and their disdain for any species they deemed lesser. They were predators, humans in particular, seemed to rub them the wrong way. Your species seems. Tense. As usual, Yukon's voice clicked with an odd amusement. Surely this peaceful gathering is not beneath you. Elias gave a tight smile, his teeth barely showing. Peaceful, he asked, his voice low and deliberate. The galaxy's definition of peace is just a polite veneer over exploitation and manipulation. Your species knows it, and so do we. Yukon's mandibles twitched, but before he could respond, a sudden commotion erupted from the far side of the hall. One of the human diplomats had been shoved, and the tension erupted into violence in an instant. Elias's hand moved, his fingers grazing the button on his communicator. The moment of diplomacy was over. It was time to show them who humanity really was. Aboard the Oberon, the human flagship, Captain Elias Dre stood before a darkened communications chamber. The air felt heavier now, thick with the weight of the decision he had made. The Oberon was in orbit around Ryler, its weapons systems primed, its crew on edge. The fleet was already moving into position, ready to take the next step, but before any further action could be taken, Elias needed to send a message, one that would echo across the galaxy. He turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Mara Quinn, who was already seated at the console, fingers hovering over the controls. The room was silent except for the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the occasional ping of data across the airwaves. "Ready, Captain," Quinn said, her voice steady but laced with anticipation. Elias nodded and stepped forward. The monitors flickered to life, and the face of the galaxy's new leader filled the screen. His image was crisp, his expression resolute. He didn't need theatrics or grandiose displays. This message wasn't meant to comfort or placate. It was meant to strike fear. He took a breath and began. To all sentient species of the galaxy, his voice rang out, amplified across every communication network. I am Captain Elias Dre, leader of the United Human Federation. You've had your warning, and we've been patient. But humanity has endured enough. We've tolerated your mockery, your schemes, your fragile peace built on the backs of weaker species and the blood of those who have no voice. No longer. A ripple of tension surged across the galaxy as the message filtered out, reaching every major capital, every warship, every civilian settlement. On Rylar, within the council chambers, the ambassadors paused, startled at the sudden broadcast. Humanity, Elias continued, his eyes cold and unyielding, has lived on a death world, a planet where survival is a constant battle. We didn't choose this, but it has shaped us. We are Deathworlders, and we are done playing by your rules. We are done being the galaxy's punching bag. If you stand in our way, if you dare to challenge us, know that we will not hesitate. Our response will be swift, and it will be final. His gaze hardened as he delivered the final line. You've forgotten what it means to face a species that fights for its survival. You won't make that mistake again. The message cut off abruptly, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Now we wait, Elias muttered, turning back toward the window, his eyes scanning the stars beyond. As the broadcast echoed through the galaxy, the Oberon drifted silently in orbit around Rylar, a quiet symbol of humanity's defiance. But Captain Elias Dre was far from calm. His mind was in the past, rooted in the history that had shaped him, and every human, into the force they had become. Flashbacks to Earth's violent, tumultuous past flickered across his thoughts. He saw the earliest days of humanity, when survival itself was a gamble. Earth, a planet plagued by storms, volcanoes, and beasts that could tear a human apart in seconds. The wilderness was as hostile as any battlefield, and the early humans had learned the most important lesson of all: *adapt or die*. It had been the great predators of Earth, saber-toothed cats, mammoths, and giant wolves, that first forced humans to evolve. The ancestors of humanity weren't the fastest, strongest, or the most fearsome creatures on their planet. They were, however, the most relentless. They had learned to hunt in packs, to outthink their enemies, to endure when others would have perished. A spear, then a bow, then the slow rise of technology. Each advancement had been driven by necessity. Each step was born from the will to survive. The story continued through the ages, ancient cities ravaged by warfare, where the human spirit was tested again and again. The rise of empires, then their fall. The discovery of fire, of tools, of the wheel. The control of agriculture, the harnessing of energy. The endless march forward, fueled by the drive to conquer nature itself. Then came the greatest challenge of all, the coming of space. Humans had always looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. But the cost of exploration was not merely the vast distances or the unknown. It was the unforgiving nature of the cosmos itself. The dangers of radiation, the vacuum of space, the risks of contact with alien species. Humans had faced all of it. And true to their nature, they had survived. They had learned to adapt. The first encounters with alien races, the forging of treaties, and the slow but inevitable recognition of humanity's raw determination in the face of the unknown. Many species had underestimated them, believed humans were still too primitive to matter. They were wrong. Elias looked out at the stars once more. They had risen from nothing but the worst conditions imaginable, and now the galaxy would learn the true cost of underestimating a Deathworlder. The Oberon drifted out of Rylar's atmosphere, cutting a steady path toward the Krazar homeworld. The human fleet, an impressive armada of warships, cruisers, and battle platforms, followed in tight formation. Each ship was a silent monument to humanity's new resolve, sleek and deadly in their simplicity. There was no grand flourish, no elaborate declarations. Humanity had taken the first step. Now they would take the next one with ruthless efficiency. Captain Elias Dre stood in the command center of the Oberon, his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze was fixed on the view screen, where the stars streaked by. He had already given the orders. It was time to act. "Captain, we're entering Krazar space," Lieutenant Mara Quinn said, her voice steady as she manned the tactical station. The screen in front of her lit up with the green blip of the Krazar's home system. Elias gave a brief nod. "Signal the fleet. Prepare for immediate engagement." A ripple of tension passed through the bridge crew as the orders were relayed. The humans weren't just sending a warning, they were sending a message. The Krazar, with their insectoid, hive-minded culture, had long seen themselves as the galaxy's dominant force. They held no love for other species, especially humans. They had been the first to mock humanity's supposed weakness at the gala, and now they would learn the cost of that mistake. Minutes later, the Oberon reached the outer rim of Krazar space. Elias could almost feel the gravity of the moment, like the tightening of a fist around his chest. They were past the point of no return. "Activate all weapon systems," Elias ordered, his voice calm but firm. On the screens in front of them, Krazar ships appeared, a formidable fleet, their ships built for aggression and war, designed to swarm and overwhelm. But the Krazar were not prepared for the precise, calculated force humanity could unleash. The Oberon and its fleet opened fire. The first salvo of kinetic rounds rained down on a Krazar communications station, obliterating it in seconds. The humans didn't waste time with diplomacy or threats. They hit first and hit hard. Their cannons tore through the outer defenses of the Krazar's orbital platforms, sending debris scattering into space. "Target their command ship," Elias said, his eyes narrowing. "We break their chain of command, and the rest will crumble." The Oberon fired again, and the Krazar flagship, a massive, pyramid-shaped vessel, shuddered under the impact. Its shields flickered and collapsed. The ship was too slow to react, too predictable. Within moments, the flagship was a burning wreck. The Krazar had underestimated humanity. Now, they were paying the price. The sound of the Oberon's weapons ceasing fire was almost eerie. The silence hung in the command center as the battle raged on outside, the final strike against the Krazar's flagship echoing through the void. For a brief moment, Captain Elias Dre allowed himself a flash of satisfaction, but he quickly buried it. This was only the beginning. The Krazar had been humiliated, their pride shattered, but the galaxy wasn't going to let humanity's aggression go unanswered. Even as the last of the Krazar ships broke apart in the distance, Elias knew the response would come swiftly, and it would be decisive. As the human fleet began to regroup, Lieutenant Mara Quinn's voice broke the silence. "Captain, we've received an encrypted transmission from the Galactic Council." Elias stood still, his gaze fixed on the view screen. The message had come faster than he anticipated. He'd known that by striking first, humanity was putting itself at the center of galactic attention. Now, the real challenge would begin. "Patch it through," Elias said, his voice low. Moments later, the face of Galen Tharm, the Council's chief ambassador and a prominent representative of the Tsarnok Confederacy, appeared on the screen. Tharm's dark, reptilian eyes glowed with a cold fury, and the layers of his silken robes shimmered with the pride of a species that saw itself as the true inheritor of the galaxy. "You've crossed a line, Captain Dre." Tharm's voice was flat, controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge beneath it. "The Krazar may be your first victim, but they will not be the last. The Galactic Council demands that you stand down immediately, or face the full weight of a united front." Elias's expression was unreadable. He'd known this was coming. "And what does that entail, Ambassador?" "Another wave of meaningless sanctions. Another attempt at diplomacy you've long since abandoned. Tharm's gaze flickered, but his words were measured. You've been warned, human. You've made your point, but now you must face the consequences. Every power in the galaxy will unite against you. Elias took a slow breath, his eyes narrowing. Then it's time for the galaxy to understand one thing. We are not afraid of your threats. If you want war, we'll give it to you. But make no mistake. We will win. We'll survive, no matter how many of you come after us. The transmission ended abruptly. Silence followed, but only for a moment. Prepare for counterattack, Elias said, turning to his officers. Let's see what the galaxy's united front can do. The first shots had been fired, and humanity would not be retreating. The message from the Galactic Council still lingered in Elias's mind. It was as he had expected, empty threats, pompous words from species that had never been forced to fight for their survival. The Krazar had been the first to feel humanity's wrath, but they wouldn't be the last. Elias stood in the Oberon's command center, watching the holographic display of star systems flicker across the main screen. A countdown ran on the corner, marking the time until the expected counterattack from the galactic powers. The full might of the Galactic Council would soon descend on them, but Elias had a plan. He knew the Council's unity wasn't as solid as they liked to pretend. There were cracks, divisions beneath the surface. He had seen it in the gala. Now it was time to exploit those fractures. Lieutenant Quinn, Elias said, his voice sharp. Prepare a message for the outcasts. We need to send an invitation to those who have been abandoned by the Council. Quinn didn't question him. She simply nodded and began working at the communications console, tapping commands into the interface with quick, practiced precision. Moments later, Elias's words began to filter out across deep space, reaching fringe colonies, mining worlds, and forgotten outposts, places where species had been left behind by the civilized galaxy. My fellow survivors, Elias began, his voice as calm and direct as ever. You've been ignored by the Council. Your worlds, your people, dismissed as irrelevant, expendable. But humanity understands what it means to be pushed aside, to be forgotten. If you want to fight back, if you want to stand for something more than just survival, then join us. We're not looking for allies. We are looking for warriors. Together, we can reshape this galaxy. Together, we will make the strong understand what happens when they turn their backs on the weak. The response was immediate. Within hours, the first transmissions arrived. The Urgor, an ancient warrior race with a long history of resistance, offered their support. The Kydrix, shapeshifters whose psychic abilities had been rejected by the Council's narrow view of what was acceptable, pledged their allegiance. And perhaps most surprisingly, the Tsirak, a nomadic species of traders and mercenaries who had long played both sides of galactic politics, sent word that they would join the human cause. Elias knew that these species, these broken, forgotten races, held power in their own right. Each of them had been a cast-off, a misfit in the eyes of the Council. Together, they were a coalition built not on ideology, but on shared experience. They were survivors, just like humanity. Captain, Quinn said, turning toward him with a smile, we've got a fleet assembling. They're ready. Elias's lips curved into a rare, grim smile. Let's give the Council something to remember. The galaxy had been quiet for too long. Now the silence was about to shatter. The human fleet, joined by their new allies, stood poised in deep space, a gathering storm of fire and fury. The outcasts, the Urgor, Kydrix, and Tsirak, had pledged their loyalty to humanity, swelling the ranks of the United Coalition. Their ships were a ragtag collection, a mix of salvaged warships and hastily refitted transports. But together, they formed a formidable force. Each of them had something to prove, a desire to rewrite the narrative of the galaxy that had long dismissed them. Captain Elias Drey stood on the bridge of the Oberon, his eyes cold as he surveyed the holographic map of the galaxy. The time had come. The Council's counterattack was imminent, and it would be nothing short of a full-scale assault. The Tsarnok Confederacy, the Ekori, and the Jerkin Alliance were sending their fleets, along with the Krazar remnants, to crush the human rebellion. They would be arriving at the core systems within hours. Elias's mind was sharp, calculating. He had learned a lot from the battles with the Krazar and the tactics of his new allies. The human fleet, now bolstered by those with the most to gain from the collapse of the Council, would not wait to be overwhelmed. They would bring the fight directly to the heart of the Council's power. "Status report," Elias commanded, his voice unwavering. "Fleet is in position," Lieutenant Quinn replied. "All ships primed, waiting for the word. We've established a perimeter around the Council's core systems. Their reinforcements won't get through." Elias turned, eyes narrowing as he looked over his officers. "This is the moment we've been waiting for. We strike now, and we strike fast. We go for their heart, Astranova. We cripple their command structure, and without it, the rest will fall. We won't give them time to regroup." The crew nodded, understanding the gravity of his words. The war had gone from a skirmish to a galactic conflict, and now it was time for the final blow. The first wave of Council ships entered the sector, a massive fleet of sleek, imposing vessels, the finest the galaxy had to offer. But they were unprepared. The human fleet had been waiting. The Oberon led the charge, its weapons systems already active, unleashing a torrent of firepower that shattered the leading Council ship before it even had time to deploy its shields. The Oberon's cannons fired again, taking down another cruiser. Behind them, the Rectic ships of the human coalition surged forward, their mismatched forms making them difficult to track in the chaos, striking with precise, deadly force. Elias's voice rang out across the comms. "This is our galaxy now. No more games. Let them know who they are up against." As the Oberon carved a path through the enemy fleet, humanity's fury and resolve became undeniable. They had come to survive, and they would win. The battle raged on, the vastness of space lit up with flashes of destruction. Every moment was chaos. The Oberon and its coalition fleet tore through the Council's forces with brutal precision, cutting through lines of ships that had once seemed invincible. The Council, shocked and disorganized, had underestimated the human resolve and the power of those who had joined them. No longer could they rely on their superior numbers and vast resources. Humanity and their allies were relentless, like a force of nature, ferocious and unstoppable. On the Oberon's bridge, Elias Drey watched the holographic battlefield, his eyes locked on the flashing readouts. The Tsarnok and the Ekori were trying to regroup, sending reinforcements from their core worlds to intercept the human advance. But the tide was already turning. The Krazar remnants, having lost their flagship, were in full retreat, while the Urgor and Kydrix provided a crushing counter-offensive on the flanks. The Xarak, though more mercenary than anything else, had proven to be ruthlessly effective in taking out Council supply lines and backdoor escape routes. "Captain, we've hit the Council's outer defences," Lieutenant Quinn reported, her voice laced with determination. "Their command fleet is still intact, but they've lost all communication with their secondary forces. Their morale's broken." "Good," Elias replied coldly. "We're not stopping until Astranova is ours." Astranova, the heart of the Galactic Council, was located in the core of the galaxy, a sprawling, heavily fortified station surrounded by fleets of the Council's most elite ships. It was the symbol of their power, the beating heart of their bureaucracy. To capture it would be to cripple the Council entirely. But Elias knew this would be the hardest part of the campaign. The station wasn't just a command center, it was a fortress. But it was also their last hope. The Oberon was already in position, its weapons systems charging for the final push. The Coalition fleet was forming up behind them, ready to strike the final blow. Elias's heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with the anticipation of victory. All ships, target Astranova, Elias commanded. We get them hard. We take down their command center, and we end this war. The human fleet and their allies closed in on the massive station, launching every missile and energy weapon at their disposal. The Oberon fired its main cannon, a pulse of devastating energy that tore through the station's outer shields, sending a shockwave across the battlefield. Astranova's defenses crumbled, its once imposing power flickering out like a dying star. The final act of the Council was one of desperation, a futile attempt to retaliate with a massive counter-strike. But it was too late. The damage had been done. Humanity had struck the fatal blow. As Astranova's command tower collapsed in a fireball of shattered metal and energy, Elias stood silent, watching it burn. His heart was calm, his mind already turning to the future. The galaxy would never be the same again. No longer would humanity be overlooked. The Deathworlders had made their stand, and the stars themselves would remember it. "We've won," Quinn said softly, as the screens displayed the destruction. Elias nodded once, his gaze distant. Yes, but now we rebuild. The reckoning was over, and humanity's rise had only just begun. End of story.